This presentation is on the anatomy of the heart. The heart sits in the thoracic cavity of the chest in the mediastinum. The thoracic cavity is the space above the diaphragm and below the neck, while the mediastinum is a small cavity that sits between the lungs. This cavity is located above the diaphragm, below the head, and protected by the rib cage. The external structures of the heart include the apex, veins, superior and inferior vena cava, arteries, and sulci. The apex is the very bottom point of the heart. The pulmonary veins receive oxygenated blood from the lungs to return to the heart. The superior and inferior vena cava receive deoxygenated blood from the body to return to the heart. The coronary arteries are the main blood supply to the myocardium, the middle wall of the heart. In general, arteries carry blood away from the heart while veins return blood to the heart. Sulci are grooves in the surface of the heart. These grooves are filled with fat and hold major blood vessels. The deep coronary sulcus holds the coronary sinus and is located between the ventricles and atria. The coronary sinus collects and drains blood from the myocardium, the middle layer of the heart walls. The anterior interventricular sulcus is located on the anterior or front surface of the heart, and the posterior interventricular sulcus is located on the posterior or back surface of the heart. These sulci hold vessels that transport blood to and from the heart's walls. The auricles and four chambers of the heart can also be identified from the external view of the heart, but will be discussed later with interior structures. Next, we'll look at the internal structures of the heart. The internal structures of the heart include the four chambers, the left and right atria, and the left and right ventricles. They also include the septa, papillary muscles, chordae tendineae, auricles, and venous and arterial openings. The left and right atria are known as the upper chambers, while the left and right ventricles are known as the lower chambers. Both atria receive blood while the ventricles pump out blood. The left atrium receives blood from the lungs. The right atrium receives blood from the body. The left ventricle pumps blood to the body. The right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs. The septa are wall-like structures that separate the heart into four chambers. The interatrial septum divides the atria from one another, while the interventricular septum separates the ventricles from one another. The heart's valves open and close to prevent backflow of blood in the heart. These are important because they ensure that blood flows only in one direction. Papillary muscles and chordae tendineae both work to control the opening and closing of the heart's valves. This is important because the blood is only supposed to flow in one direction. If a valve were to open and let the blood backflow into another chamber, it could create more heart problems. The auricles are surfaces that expand as the heart fills with blood. The auricles collect blood from the lungs and the rest of the body to return to the left and right ventricles. The venous and arterial openings also work to ensure that blood flows in the correct direction. They open and close in order to allow blood to flow in one direction while preventing the backflow. The layers of the heart muscle. The heart's walls are made up of three layers: the epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium. The epicardium is the outermost layer and is also a part of the pericardium. The pericardium is an outer sac surrounding the heart that contains fluid. The myocardium is the middle layer of the heart's walls. This is also the thickest layer of the heart. It consists mostly of cardiac myocytes, the contractile cells of cardiac muscle tissue. Lastly, the endocardium is the innermost layer of the heart. Endocardium lines the internal structures of the heart and is made of both simple squamous epithelium and areolar tissue. Major blood vessels of the heart. The major blood vessels of the heart include the superior and inferior vena cava, the pulmonary trunk or arteries, pulmonary veins, and the aorta. The superior vena cava is a large vessel that receives blood from the upper body and the head, and returns this blood to the right atrium for it to later be reoxygenated by the lungs. The inferior vena cava is another large vessel that receives blood from the lower body and also returns this blood to the right atrium. The pulmonary arteries take the blood from the right ventricle and pump it into the lungs, which is known as the pulmonary circuit. The pulmonary veins will return the oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium. This blood is then pumped through the body by the aorta. The aorta has several parts, including the aortic arch, brachiocephalic artery, common carotid artery, left subclavian artery, and descending aorta. Each of these supplies oxygenated blood to various parts of the body, but the descending aorta is the main source of oxygen-rich blood to be supplied to the lower body. The heart controls both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood flow. The deoxygenated blood flow can be seen in the diagram, color-coded in blue. The arrows demonstrate the order in which the deoxygenated blood flows. Deoxygenated blood returns to the heart from the body through the superior and inferior vena cava. The blood from the head and upper body returns to the heart via the superior vena cava, while the blood from the lower body returns to the heart via the inferior vena cava. From the superior and inferior vena cava, the deoxygenated blood flows to the right atrium and passes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. The blood then passes through the pulmonary valve to the pulmonary arteries, where it will then enter the pulmonary circuit to be reoxygenated by the lungs. Now we'll focus on the oxygenated blood flow. This can be seen in the red on the diagram, with the arrows pointing in which way the blood's flowing. After the blood is reoxygenated by the lungs through the pulmonary circuit, the blood returns to the heart via the pulmonary veins. The oxygenated blood will then move from the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. The blood from the left atrium passes through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. From there, the oxygenated blood moves into the aorta and its branches in order to return to the body to provide oxygen. One potential and relatively common heart problem is called an arrhythmia. The heart is a complex organ and lots of things can go wrong when parts malfunction. Arrhythmias are pretty common. An arrhythmia is a frequent, irregular heartbeat. This can mean that during rest, the heart beats either too slowly, too quickly, or skips beats too frequently. The most common symptom of an arrhythmia is dizziness. Arrhythmias are treatable with certain medications including adenosine, beta blockers, calcium, sodium, or potassium channel blockers, and certain procedures. One of these procedures can include the insertion of a pacemaker, while others can implant cardioverter defibrillators. These medications can help slow and regulate heart rate, but all of them have certain side effects. The insertion of a pacemaker or implantable cardioverter defibrillator, or ICD, regulates the heart rate by using electrical pulses to shock the heart. Cardioversion is another treatment for arrhythmias. It uses external electric shocks and is often used in emergencies, and known as defibrillation, to shock a heart back to a regular heart rhythm. If left untreated, an arrhythmia can lead to a stroke, cardiac arrest, or other type of heart failure. This is why it is crucial to have an arrhythmia treated as soon as possible. Here's an overview of some of the vocabulary from this lesson. Some of these have already been discussed, while others may be new. The thoracic cavity is the body space below the neck and above the diaphragm. This is where the heart is located. The mediastinum is a small cavity in the thoracic cavity that is located between the lungs. The base of the heart is where the superior posterior part of the heart that contains both atria. The apex is the most inferior point of the heart, and the pericardium or pericardial sac is the membrane that lines the outside of the heart, containing the pericardial fluid. The visceral pericardium is an inner layer of the serous pericardium. This is also known as the epicardium, which is the outermost layer of the heart. The parietal pericardium is the outer layer of the pericardium, and it covers the pericardial cavity. The pericardial cavity is the space between the parietal and visceral pericardium. It contains the pericardial fluid. The pericardial fluid is a liquid held in the pericardial cavity. It prevents friction and it cushions the heart. The atria are the upper chambers of the heart, which receive blood from the lungs and body. The ventricles are the lower chambers of the heart, which pump blood to the lungs and body. The interventricular septum is a layer of myocardium lined with endocardium, and it separates the ventricles from each other. The interatrial septum is a layer of myocardium lined with endocardium that separates the atria from one another. The atrioventricular septum is also a layer of myocardium lined with endocardium, and this separates the atria and ventricles from each other. The great vessels are wide blood vessels, and they include the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, pulmonary arteries, and pulmonary veins. The superior vena cava receives blood from the head and upper body to return to the heart. The inferior vena cava receives blood from the lower body to return to the heart. The pulmonary arteries send blood to the lungs from the heart, and the pulmonary veins return blood to the heart from the lungs. The aortic arch is the main source where oxygenated blood is pumped to the body. This contains several branches, including the brachiocephalic artery, the common carotid artery, the left subclavian artery, and the descending aorta. The brachiocephalic artery sends oxygenated blood from the heart to the right arm, The common carotid artery sends this oxygenated blood to the head and neck. The left subclavian artery sends the blood from the heart to the left arm, and the descending aorta sends the blood to the lower body. The coronary circuit is a group of blood vessels responsible for circulating blood through the myocardium. The coronary arteries supply blood to the myocardium. The coronary sinus receives blood from the coronary veins and returns it to the right atrium, and the coronary veins remove the deoxygenated blood from the myocardium and deliver it to the coronary sinus. The four valves of the heart include the mitral valve, tricuspid valve, pulmonary valve, and aortic valve, and all of these make sure that the blood flows in the correct direction without backflowing. The mitral valve controls the blood flow from the left atrium to the left ventricle. The tricuspid valve controls the blood flow from the right atrium to the right ventricle. The pulmonary valve controls the blood flow from the right ventricle to the pulmonary trunk. This is also known as the pulmonary semilunar valve. And the aortic valve controls the blood flow from the left ventricle to the aorta. This is also known as the aortic semilunar valve. Here's a list of references that have been used for this presentation. And that's the end. Thank you for watching.